A cowboy returned from war to find his family gone. She was living alone in his abandoned cabin. Jack Callahan rode slowly along the dusty trail, the familiar creak of his saddle echoing in the still morning air. The war was finally over, and he was coming home. It had been years since he had last seen his small town in the heart of Texas, years filled with dust, danger, and endless battles. Every step of his horse seemed to take him closer to the past he had fought to protect, a past that he hoped had not changed too much while he was away. Jack's hat shaded his tired eyes, and he wiped the sweat from his brow with a rough, calloused hand. The sun had begun its slow climb, casting long, golden shadows across the plains. The land around him looked the same yet different, familiar but distant. Rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, dotted with sparse trees and the occasional fence marking someone's claim. The smell of dry grass and the faint tang of horses and cattle filled the air. Memories flooded back, playing in the fields with his children, the sound of Martha's laughter echoing in the cabin, evenings spent sitting by the fire telling stories. He could almost hear it all again, and it both warmed his heart and made it ache. He tightened his grip on the reins and urged his horse forward. The cabin, the little home he had built with his own hands, was just a few miles away. Every nail and plank had been placed with care, every corner filled with love and hope. It had been more than a house. It had been a sanctuary, a place of laughter and safety. The thought of seeing it again made Jack's heart race with anticipation. But beneath that excitement was a gnawing worry. The war had taken him far from home, and he could not know what had happened in his absence. As he rounded the final bend, the cabin came into view. His chest tightened at the sight. The roof still held strong, the walls standing proud against the wind and time. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, curling into the blue sky. For a moment, hope surged inside him. Perhaps his family was there, waiting for him, but something felt off. The garden, once carefully tended by Martha, was overgrown. The fence sagged in one corner, and the path to the front door was covered in weeds. The cabin seemed alive, but not in the way it had once been. Jack slid from his horse and let it graze at the sparse grass nearby. He approached the cabin cautiously, each step heavy with anticipation. The door was closed, but the old wooden hinges groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of wood smoke, but it was empty. Plates lay scattered on the table, but they had not been used for years. A chair was tipped over as if someone had left in a hurry. Jack's stomach knotted and a cold shiver ran down his spine. "Where were they?" he called out, his voice echoing off the walls. "Martha." "Children," the sound of his own voice startled him. The cabin seemed to swallow his words. Silence answered him, deep and heavy. His heart sank, and he ran his hand over the rough wooden table, the memories of countless family meals passing through his mind. He could almost feel Martha sitting there, humming softly, and the children arguing playfully over a game. But the reality was clear. There was no one there. Jack walked through every corner of the cabin, checking the bedrooms, the kitchen, even the small storage area behind the fireplace. Everything was as it had been when he left, yet somehow it was not. His children's toys lay untouched, covered in dust. Their little shoes sat by the doorway, but there was no sign of life. Jack sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. How could this have happened? Where had they gone? He had fought through fire and bullets, only to come home to an empty house. He spent the rest of the day searching the immediate area, calling out for his family. The wind carried his voice across the fields, but only the whisper of the grass answered. He found tracks leading away from the cabin, small, hurried footprints that could have belonged to children. They seemed fresh enough to suggest that someone had passed this way recently, but there were no signs of struggle. Jack traced them as far as the woods at the edge of the property, hoping to find a clue, but they disappeared into the underbrush. As the sun began to set, Jack returned to the cabin, exhausted and anxious. The sky burned with shades of orange and red, casting a warm glow over the land, but it did nothing to ease the chill in his heart. He tended to the fire in the hearth, hoping for a sign, any sign, that his family had not been lost completely. Night fell slowly, the stars twinkling above like distant eyes watching over him. He listened to the quiet, broken only by the occasional call of an owl or the rustle of the wind through the trees. That night Jack slept in the cabin for the first time in years, but sleep was restless. Dreams of the battlefield mixed with visions of the cabin filled his mind. He dreamt of Martha smiling at him, of the children running to him, but every time he reached out, they faded away. The dawn brought no answers. He awoke to the soft light of morning, the smell of dew, and the faint hint of smoke still in the air. Determination settled over him like a second skin. He could not leave the cabin without knowing what had happened. Over the next several days, Jack began to make small repairs to the cabin, clearing away weeds, fixing the sagging fence, and cleaning up the dust and dirt that had accumulated. Each plank he hammered back into place reminded him of the life that had once thrived here. While he worked, he kept his eyes and ears open for any signs of his family. Neighbors were scarce, most having moved on or perished during the harsh years of war and drought. Jack spoke to the few he encountered, asking carefully about Martha and the children, but no one seemed to know. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a shadow moved across the cabin yard. Jack's hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door, though he did not raise it. A woman stepped into the clearing, cautious but unafraid. Her clothes were worn, her face pale from exposure, but her eyes held a quiet strength. Jack studied her carefully. She carried a small bundle, and when she saw him, she froze, just as startled as he was. "My name is Eliza," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I hope I'm not intruding. I've been staying here. It's been hard." Jack lowered his rifle slowly, his mind racing. Who was she? How had she come to be in his cabin? And more importantly, where was his family? There was a mixture of relief and suspicion in his heart. Relief that someone was alive, someone in need, but suspicion because this was his home, his sacred place. Over the following days, Jack spoke with Eliza, learning that she had lost her home in a fire and had wandered for weeks before finding the cabin. She had stayed quietly, not daring to disturb what she assumed was abandoned. Jack could not bring himself to be angry with her. Instead, he felt a strange kinship. Both of them had been through hardships, both had suffered loss, and both were struggling to find a place to belong. Despite the distraction, Jack never forgot his real purpose, finding his family. Every day he searched the surrounding area, questioning anyone he met. He left no stone unturned, no trail unexplored. Each day brought small clues, scraps of information, but nothing concrete. Yet in the midst of his despair, he found solace in Eliza's company. She helped him tend the cabin, shared meals, and offered encouragement when his spirits faltered. Weeks passed, and still there was no sign of Martha or the children. Jack's hope wavered, but it never died. He refused to believe that they were gone, refused to accept a world without them. Every night he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, imagining them coming back to him, imagining the laughter returning to the cabin. And every morning he rose again, determined to continue the search. The cabin, once a symbol of his past life, had become a place of waiting, a bridge between what was lost and what might still be found. Jack knew that the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but he was ready to face it. With Eliza by his side and the memories of his family guiding him, he prepared for the journey ahead. No matter how far he had to travel, no matter how many obstacles lay in his path, he would not rest until he knew the fate of the ones he loved most. And so, in the quiet plains of Texas, under a sky painted with dawn and dust, Jack Callahan began the first chapter of his return, not just to his cabin, but to the life he had once known and the family he was determined to find. Life at the cabin had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Jack Callahan moved with purpose, repairing broken boards, cleaning the dust from the old wooden floor, and tending to the small garden that had begun to reclaim itself. Every swing of the hammer, every stroke of the broom, was a reminder of the home he had lost and was determined to restore. And yet, even as he worked, the emptiness of the cabin reminded him that something, or someone, was missing. His family was still gone, and every passing day made the question of their fate heavier in his heart. Eliza had become a quiet presence in the cabin. She moved about the house carefully, as if she were aware she was intruding in someone else's life, yet she offered help without hesitation. She chopped firewood, swept the floor, and even tried her hand at repairing one of the broken windows. Jack noticed her skill with her hands and the way her eyes lit up when she accomplished a task. At first, he was wary of her presence. He had lived through loss and betrayal in the war, and the idea of trusting someone new did not come easily. But her steady, calm, and gentle manner gradually eased his tension. "I've been alone a long time," Eliza said one evening as they sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of bread and roasted vegetables. It's not easy losing everything. Jack nodded, chewing slowly. I know that feeling. I came back to find my family gone. No letters, no signs, just silence. His voice broke slightly and he stared into the flames. I don't even know where to start looking. Eliza reached across the table and placed a hand on his. It was a small gesture, but it carried warmth and understanding. Sometimes the first step is finding someone who can help you remember where to look, she said softly, and sometimes it's just about not giving up. Her words stayed with Jack. There was truth in them, and though he had been hardened by years of fighting, he realized that he could not continue this search alone. They began talking every night, exchanging stories of their pasts. Jack shared tales of the war, of the long nights under a starlit sky and the dangers he had faced. Eliza spoke of her family, the fire that had destroyed her home, and the long journey she had taken to reach the cabin. In those conversations, a bond began to form. Both had suffered loss and hardship, yet both carried a quiet strength that allowed them to continue. Jack found himself listening to her stories with a growing sense of admiration. She had endured loneliness, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had survived, resourceful and resilient. In turn, Eliza saw in Jack a man shaped by trials, yet deeply human in his sorrow and hope. Despite the companionship, Jack could not let go of his search. Every day, he rode out into the surrounding countryside, asking anyone he encountered about his family. He visited nearby farms, spoke to traveling merchants, and questioned townsfolk who had remained in the area. Some remembered the Callahans, but their recollections were vague. One elderly farmer recalled seeing Martha and the children a year ago, traveling toward a settlement further east. Another mentioned rumors of a small family seeking shelter after the outlaws had raided nearby homesteads. These fragments of information, though incomplete, fueled Jack's determination. He began mapping the area in his mind, marking the places where sightings had occurred and considering the routes his family might have taken. Every piece of news, every rumor became a potential clue, and he refused to dismiss any of them. Even the smallest detail, a description of a horse, a mention of a stranger helping them, was enough to guide his next steps. Eliza accompanied him on some of these rides, her presence a quiet reassurance. She had grown accustomed to the life of the plains, moving with confidence on horseback and reading the landscape with careful attention. Jack noticed her skill and resourcefulness, and while he remained focused on finding his family, he began to rely on her insight. Together, they followed trails that led to abandoned homesteads, overgrown paths, and quiet villages. Every day brought hope, even when it ended with disappointment. One afternoon, Jack and Eliza came across a small stream that cut through a narrow valley. The sun reflected off the water, creating a sparkling path that seemed almost magical. Jack dismounted and knelt by the edge, tracing the footprints left in the soft earth. They were small and hurried, children perhaps. He felt a spark of hope. Eliza knelt beside him, examining the tracks. "These are recent," she said, pointing to the impressions. "Someone passed this way not long ago." Jack's heart pounded. He studied the tracks carefully, following them for several miles until they disappeared into a dense thicket. Though he could not continue beyond the brush, the evidence confirmed that his family had indeed passed this way. He and Eliza set up camp nearby, tending a small fire and keeping watch through the night. They spoke little, each lost in thought. Jack's mind wandered to Martha and the children, imagining them somewhere beyond the trees, safe but afraid. As the days passed, Jack began to notice subtle changes in the land around the cabin. A coyote pack had moved closer, a sign that humans were scarce in the area. The garden he had tended slowly began to bloom again, and the cabin itself seemed to take on a sense of life as they repaired the roof and reinforced the walls. It became a small sanctuary once more, a place where they could rest and prepare for the next day's search. Through it all, Jack's bond with Eliza deepened. He found comfort in her presence, a sense of companionship he had not realized he needed. She was not a replacement for his family. Nothing could ever replace them. But she reminded him of the strength of human connection, of the ways people could support each other through hardship. At night, as they sat by the fire, he would glance at her and feel a warmth that went beyond friendship, though he did not fully understand it yet. One evening, a letter arrived from a distant post office. Jack's hands trembled as he opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message brought both hope and frustration. A neighbor from the east had seen a woman and children matching Martha and the children's description near a remote settlement. They were alive but had moved frequently, avoiding contact with strangers. Jack read and reread the letter, committing every detail to memory. The path ahead was clearer now, though still uncertain. With renewed determination, Jack planned their next journey. He and Eliza packed provisions and prepared for a long ride, mapping the route based on the letter's details. The journey would be difficult, requiring them to cross rivers, navigate dense forests, and endure the unpredictable weather of the plains. Yet Jack felt ready. For the first time in months, he felt a surge of hope that his family was within reach. Before leaving, he walked through the cabin one last time, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. He ran his hand over the table where countless meals had been shared, touched the wooden frames of the bedrooms where his children had slept, and paused by the fireplace where he had once held Martha close on cold nights. The cabin had been a refuge, a place of memory and love, and he promised himself that he would return one day with his family restored. Eliza joined him outside, holding the reins of their horses. "We'll find them," she said softly, her voice steady with conviction. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. Together they rode into the morning light, the wind carrying the scent of grass and earth and the promise of reunion with it. Days turned into weeks as they followed the trail eastward. They faced storms that drenched them to the bone, wild animals that threatened their path, and the constant uncertainty of whether they were on the right track. Yet each hardship only strengthened Jack's resolve. Every village they passed through brought new information, small hints that pieced together the journey his family had taken. Eliza remained by his side, her quiet courage matching his own, and he came to rely on her in ways he had never expected. Finally, one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, they spotted a small settlement in the distance. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the faint sound of children's laughter reached them across the fields. Jack's heart leapt. Could it be? Could this be where his family had taken refuge? He urged his horse forward, careful to stay out of sight, his eyes scanning every detail. Eliza rode beside him, her hand steady on the reins, her gaze fixed ahead. They found the settlement quiet but alive. People went about their daily tasks, tending gardens, feeding livestock, and repairing homes. Jack recognized signs of Martha's skill in the way the small plots were cultivated. Could she be here? He dismounted and approached cautiously, every nerve alert, and then he saw her. Martha, older, changed by time and hardship, but unmistakably her. She was tending to a small garden, her hands skillful and steady. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The children ran and played nearby, laughing and shouting, unaware of the man who had been searching for them for years. Tears blurred his vision, and he felt a mix of joy, relief, and disbelief. They were alive. Eliza watched silently, giving Jack space, understanding the depth of the moment. For the first time in years, hope became reality. Jack knew that the next steps would be delicate. He would have to approach Martha carefully, explain his absence, and rebuild the trust that years apart had strained. But for now, he simply took it all in, the sight of his family, the sound of their voices, the promise of new beginnings. The journey was far from over, but the hardest part, the fear of never finding them, was finally behind him. Jack felt a sense of peace he had not known since leaving the cabin years ago. And though challenges still awaited, he was ready to face them, bolstered by the love of his family and the steadfast support of Eliza, who had walked beside him through the darkest days. Jack rode slowly along the dusty trail, his eyes scanning every tree line, every hill, every shadow. The letter he had received weeks ago from a distant post office had pointed him toward this part of the countryside, but the directions were vague, and he had learned long ago that rumors could be misleading. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying scents of earth and animals, and Jack's horse shifted uneasily under him, as if sensing his tension. He knew he was close, but he also knew that the closer he got, the more careful he had to be. Eliza rode beside him, her posture calm, her gaze sharp. She had become a steady presence, not just a companion, but someone he could rely on when fatigue and doubt threatened to slow him. She had a way of reading the land, noticing details he might have overlooked. A broken branch indicating someone had passed, a footprint partially hidden by dirt, the faint smell of smoke on the wind. Together, they were careful, deliberate, and patient. Their first stop was a small town nestled along the banks of a winding river. It was quiet, almost too quiet for a place that should be bustling with people at midday. They tied their horses outside the only general store and stepped inside. The air smelled of dried herbs, tobacco, and old wood. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, with deep lines etched across his face and eyes that had seen too much. "Good afternoon, sir," Jack said politely, his voice steady though his heart raced. "I'm looking for a woman named Martha Callahan. She's traveling with 2 children. Have you seen them?" The man studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "Callahan's name sounds familiar, but it's been a long time since anyone with that name came through." "Where are they supposed to be headed?" Jack pulled the letter from his coat and showed it to the man. "Somewhere east of here near the small settlements along the river. Any idea?" The man scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Could be the Henderson settlement. Folks there sometimes take in travelers, especially women and children who have been through hard times. It's about 2 days' ride east." Jack's chest tightened with hope. 2 days away and he might finally find his family. He turned to Eliza, who nodded, her expression calm but alert. They bought a few provisions and set out, riding steadily through the fields and along narrow trails that led to the river. The journey was quiet, punctuated only by the soft sounds of the horses' hooves and the occasional bird calling in the trees. As they approached the Henderson settlement, Jack noticed signs of life. Smoke curling from chimneys, the sound of children laughing in the distance, the occasional movement of people tending gardens or livestock. He slowed his horse and signaled Eliza to do the same. "We need to be careful," he whispered. "We can't startle them. We don't know what has happened in these years." Eliza nodded and kept close, her eyes scanning the settlement. Jack's heart pounded as they moved closer, each step bringing him nearer to the possibility of reunion. He dismounted and led his horse along the edge of the clearing, staying hidden behind tall bushes and trees. The settlement was modest but well kept, a collection of small wooden homes, gardens, and fenced areas for animals. It was clear that the people living here were hardworking, surviving off the land with care and determination. Then he saw her, Martha. She was kneeling in a small garden, her hands covered in dirt as she planted seedlings. She looked older than he remembered, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the hardships of life on the plains, yet there was a strength in her posture that Jack recognized immediately. His breath caught in his throat. There were tears in his eyes, and he felt a lump in his throat that made it hard to speak. Nearby, the children played, their laughter ringing out across the settlement. Jack recognized them instantly, their hair, their eyes, the way they moved. They were alive, safe, but cautious, as if the world had taught them to be wary. He wanted to run to them, to sweep them into his arms, but he knew he needed to be careful. Years had passed, and there was a delicate trust to rebuild. Eliza remained behind him, silently observing. She understood the weight of the moment, the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "Let me go first," Jack whispered to her. "I need to be the one to reach them." He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped into the clearing. His boots crunched softly on the gravel path, and the children paused their play, turning toward the sound. Martha looked up as well, and for a moment neither spoke. The years apart, the uncertainty and the distance collapsed into a single heartbeat. "Martha," he said softly, his voice trembling with emotion. Martha's eyes widened and she stood slowly, a mixture of fear, surprise, and hope in her expression. "Jack," she whispered, barely believing what she saw. "Yes, it's me," he said, taking careful steps toward her. "I've come back, I've come home." The children ran toward him, their small feet pounding on the ground, their laughter mingled with tears. Jack knelt and swept them into his arms, holding them tightly as though he could make up for all the lost years in a single embrace. Their faces pressed against his chest, their warmth grounding him in a reality he had dreamed of for so long. Martha stood for a moment, studying him, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't know if you'd ever return," she said softly. "We tried to survive, we tried to keep going, but I feared." Her voice broke, and she turned away for a moment before finally stepping forward and placing her hands on his shoulders. "You're here. You're really here." Jack felt tears sting his eyes. He had imagined this moment countless times, but reality was even more powerful than his dreams. "I promised myself I'd find you," he said, "no matter what it took, no matter how far I had to ride." The days that followed were filled with both joy and careful adjustment. Jack spent time talking with the neighbors in the settlement, gathering details about the years they had been apart. Martha explained that after Jack had left for the war, a band of outlaws had raided their homestead. To protect the children, she had moved them from place to place, avoiding the main roads and strangers. They had survived by her wits, by relying on the kindness of neighbors, and by working tirelessly to build a safe life. Jack listened intently, absorbing every detail, grateful that his family had survived despite the hardships. Yet even as joy filled his heart, he knew there was work to be done. Rebuilding trust, restoring their lives, and ensuring their safety in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving would take time. He also had to reconcile the bond he had formed with Eliza, who had accompanied him through every challenge and hardship on the journey to find his family. Eliza remained quietly in the background, giving Jack space while offering practical help. She assisted with tending animals, repairing fences, and even helping Martha organize the small settlement garden. Her presence was unassuming, yet essential, and both Jack and Martha came to respect and appreciate her support. Though the initial reunion had been emotional, the practical work of rebuilding their lives reminded Jack of the resilience and strength his family, and those like Eliza, possessed. In the evenings, Jack would sit by the fire outside the small cabin he had rebuilt in the settlement. Martha and the children would join him, sharing stories and laughter that had been absent for far too long. Sometimes he would glance at Eliza, who often sat quietly nearby, her expression thoughtful. He realized that she had been a guiding presence, a steady hand through the storm of uncertainty and loss. Though the reunion was sweet and healing, Jack knew that the journey was not yet over. There were still challenges to face, bonds to repair, and a life to rebuild from the ground up. One evening after the children had gone to bed, Jack and Martha walked together through the fields. The sun had set, leaving a soft glow across the plains, and the air was filled with the scent of wildflowers and freshly turned earth. Jack took her hand gently. "I never stopped thinking about you about them," he said. "Every step I took, I hoped I would find you." Martha squeezed his hand in return. "And you did," she said softly. "You came back even when the odds seemed impossible. That is what matters." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly. He knew the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges, and that the process of healing and rebuilding could not be rushed. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, a belief that they could survive together, stronger than before. The cabin, the settlement, and the fields beyond were more than just a home. They were a testament to endurance, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And as Jack, Martha, the children, and Eliza looked toward the horizon, each understood that though the past had been difficult and the journey long, the promise of a new beginning was finally within reach. The morning sun spread its warm light across the plains, painting the settlement in shades of gold and amber. Jack Callahan awoke with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. Last night, after the children had fallen asleep, he had sat by the small cabin, listening to the soft breathing of his family and the quiet rustle of leaves outside. For the first time since returning from war, he felt that the long, difficult journey was beginning to bear fruit. Martha had already risen, tending to the small garden they had nurtured together. Her hands worked skillfully, planting seedlings and clearing weeds, her movements deliberate yet gentle. Jack watched her from the doorway, remembering how much she had sacrificed to keep their family safe. Despite the hardships, she had never given up, and her strength and resilience filled him with admiration and gratitude. The children were already awake, their laughter carrying across the yard as they chased each other around the small pens where chickens and goats roamed freely. Their happiness was infectious, and Jack felt a warmth spread through him that chased away the lingering shadows of the past. They were alive, they were safe, and the years of fear and uncertainty were finally behind them. Eliza moved quietly among them, helping the children with their chores, guiding them gently but firmly, and offering smiles that radiated patience and kindness. Jack noticed her care and dedication, realizing that her presence had been essential in their journey. She had shared in their struggles, offered comfort in times of doubt, and helped him remain focused when hope seemed distant. Though her place in his life was unique, he understood that her role was a gift, a reminder that bonds could be formed in unexpected ways. Jack walked over to Martha and took her hand. "We have work to do," he said softly, though his voice carried a lightness that had been absent for years. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like we can face it together." Martha smiled, a quiet strength shining through her expression. "Yes," she said, "we have survived everything life has thrown at us. Now we can rebuild not just the cabin or the settlement, but us as a family." The following weeks were filled with labor, learning, and renewal. Jack and Martha worked side by side, repairing the small cabins, tending the gardens, and ensuring the children had everything they needed. The land, once barren in places and overgrown in others, began to thrive under their care. Eliza remained a steady presence, helping wherever she could, teaching the children small lessons about survival, responsibility, and hope. Jack found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The years of war, the long rides across the plains, the uncertainty and fear, they had all led to this moment of reunion and healing. And yet, he understood that healing was not just about survival. It was about trust, about connection, about allowing love to return even after loss and separation. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Jack and Eliza rode to the edge of the settlement. They had heard rumors of traders passing through a nearby town, and Jack wanted to gather supplies to ensure the settlement could sustain them through the coming months. Eliza guided him along a narrow trail, her eyes sharp, noticing every detail. "This way," she said softly, pointing toward a path lined with wildflowers and tall grass. "It's safer than the main road, fewer travelers, fewer risks." Jack nodded, appreciating her guidance. They rode in silence for a while, the wind in their hair and the sound of their horses' hooves mingling with the distant call of birds. Finally, they reached the town, a modest collection of shops, stables, and homes. Jack's presence drew curious glances, but he remained focused on his task. They purchased provisions, flour, dried meat, tools, and other essentials, and returned to the settlement, their baskets heavy but their spirits light. Back at the cabin, Jack unpacked the supplies while Martha and the children prepared a meal. The aroma of bread baking and vegetables roasting filled the air, creating a sense of home that Jack had longed for throughout the years. As they sat down to eat together, he looked around at the faces of his family and Eliza. Each one reflected hope, resilience, and the promise of a new beginning. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jack and Martha sat by the fire. The flames danced, casting shadows on the walls, and the quiet of the plains settled around them. "I never imagined it would be like this," Jack said softly. "I feared we would never find each other, that years of war and hardship would take away everything we loved." Martha placed her hand on his, her eyes filled with warmth. "We've survived because we never gave up," she replied. "Because we believed in each other even when the world seemed against us, and because you came back for us, that matters more than anything else." Jack nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew the journey ahead would still have challenges, but he also knew they were no longer facing it alone. Their family had been restored, their bonds strengthened by the trials they had endured. And though Eliza was not part of their immediate family by blood, she had become an important part of their lives, a reminder that love and loyalty could take many forms. In the weeks that followed, Jack and Martha worked to secure their land and home. They built fences, repaired barns, and planted crops that would sustain them for the coming seasons. The children thrived, learning about the land, helping with chores, and exploring the fields under careful supervision. Eliza continued to assist them, her quiet presence a source of guidance and encouragement. One morning, as Jack tended the horses, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had faced the horrors of war, the uncertainty of an empty cabin, and the fear of losing his family forever. Yet through all of it, he had discovered strength within himself and others, resilience in the face of hardship, and the importance of hope. Each step of the journey, no matter how difficult, had led to this moment of reunion and renewal. Martha joined him in the stable, handing him a brush. "It feels good to see everything coming together," she said, smiling. "The cabin, the land, the children, and us." Jack returned her smile, brushing the horse's coat with careful attention. "Yes," he replied. "We've come a long way and we still have a long way to go, but we're together now and that makes all the difference." As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow across the plains, Jack, Martha, the children, and Eliza gathered outside the cabin. They watched as the sky transformed into brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, the stars beginning to twinkle as night approached. It was a peaceful moment, a rare moment of calm after years of struggle and uncertainty. Jack felt a sense of fulfillment he had not known since leaving home for war. The cabin, once abandoned and silent, was now alive with laughter, conversation, and the quiet hum of daily life. The land, once harsh and unyielding, had been tamed through hard work, patience, and care. And most importantly, his family was whole again, their bonds stronger for having survived the trials of the past. Eliza stood quietly nearby, watching the scene with a soft smile. Jack walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Eliza nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "You didn't do it alone," she replied, "but you found them. That's what matters most." Jack turned back to his family, feeling a sense of completeness that had eluded him for years. He knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, life was never without hardship, but he also knew that they could face it together. With Martha by his side, the children thriving, and Eliza nearby as a friend and guide, they had all the strength they needed. As night fell, the family gathered around the fire outside the cabin, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The stars shone brightly overhead, each one a reminder of the journey they had endured and the hope that had carried them through. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that the trials of the past had led to this moment of peace, reunion, and renewal. And as the fire crackled and the night embraced the plains, Jack Callahan, Martha, their children, and Eliza looked toward the future with hope, determination, and the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and forever. Bound by love, resilience, and the enduring power of family. The cabin, once abandoned and silent, now stood as a symbol of survival, hope, and the strength of human connection. Its walls had witnessed despair, uncertainty, and loss, but also reunion, healing, and the promise of new beginnings. And as the family settled into their life on the plains, they knew that no matter where the world took them, they would always carry the lessons of the journey, the bonds of family, and the strength of the human spirit in their hearts.